3 Chinese sailors on the merchant vessel Queen landed in Maryland in 1785. During the 160 years between then and 1945, the Chinese have experienced hardship and created wonders and received help from many other ethnicities. In the same spirit of the Chinese proverb, reciprocate a drop of water received in need with a spring. We would return kindness with magnitudes more. Our hand drawings featured only Maria, Bee, Buck, Garrison, and Hoar, among others, who provided generous and sincere help to the first generation of Chinese immigrants facing adversity. The descendants of Chinese immigrants drew them out of gratitude and respect. Hannah Maria. Hannah Maria was James Harvey Strobridge's wife, and Strobridge was the superintendent of the Central Pacific Railway construction. During the outbreak of smallpox in January 1869, she delivered water to the Chinese railroad workers despite the risk of the disease. The couple also took care of some patients within their capacity in the train compartment they stayed in. Helping sick Chinese workers. Hannah Maria was infected with smallpox from patients she tended to. After the recovery, she wore a veil when going outside. Frederick A.B. Frederick A.B. was a descendant of immigrants from England and Scotland. Out of righteousness, he repeatedly testified at Congress for the rights of Chinese immigrants. Due to these activities, the Qing dynasty officially appointed him as a consul when the Chinese General Consulate opened in San Francisco during the early years post the Chinese Exclusion Act. B worked there for 14 years until his sudden death while on duty in 1892. After the memorial at the church, 125 carriages followed his coffin to the cemetery, among which more than 100 carriages carried the Chinese attendees. He was the only American that has ever worked at a Chinese consulate as a consul. Pearl S. Buck, a human bridge between the civilization of the East and West. In 1892, Buck's parents took 4-month-old Buck with them to Zhenjiang, China, and started their 18-year missionary. Buck lived in China for 40 years and became an American female writer with Chinese as her mother tongue. She wrote the novel The Good Earth, which described the lives of Chinese farmers. The book won her the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1938, the third one for the U.S. Buck left China and settled in the U.S. in 1934. At the invitation of BBC and Voice of America in March 1942, she broadcasted to China in Chinese how the Americans understood and supported the Chinese People's War against the Japanese invasion. In July 1943, Buck invited writers and scholars, both Chinese and American, to gather at her apartment in Pennsylvania for discussions of China-U.S. relations. After this gathering, the group started to widely promote to the American government the idea of supporting China's war against Japan's invasion. Buck also mobilized 1,000 American women and donated hundreds of thousands of US dollars to support China's war against Japan. On August 15, 1942, Song Meiling specifically wrote a letter to express gratitude towards Buck. In addition, Buck inspired American celebrities and the general public to write nearly 10,000 letters to support the Chinese people, including letters from the governors of 9 states. She had also enthusiastically helped many Chinese intellectuals, including Lao She, Hu Shi, and Lin Yutang. Additionally, she arranged and hosted Wang Ying's performance at the White House to promote the war against Japan, in front of the president and other politicians. Buck passed away on March 6, 1973. President Nixon praised her as a human bridge between the civilization of the East and West. Congressional speech against Chinese exclusion. William Lloyd Garrison Jr. was born in Boston in 1838. He was an outstanding advocate for a single tax system, free trade, women's voting rights, and the abolition of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Garrison Jr.'s father was an eminent abolitionist, and in 1831, he founded the anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator, in Boston. In 1882, in violation of the principle that all men are created equal, the U.S. Congress enacted the Chinese Exclusion Act to prohibit Chinese immigration. It was the first law in U.S. history that restricted immigration based on ethnicity. In 1902, Congress was getting ready to extend the act indefinitely. With nearly 90,000 Chinese in the U.S. in 1900, the Chinese community was caught in a difficult time of exclusion. In 1902, 64-year-old Garrison poignantly pointed out in his speech that the essence of the exclusion of Chinese people was the need to gain votes of the unions along the West Coast. He also rebutted the 6 accusations against the Chinese by saying the following. Number 1. Were the Chinese not integrated in America? You did not even plan to interact with them. Persecution would only lead to a more united Chinese group. Number 2. Did the Chinese remit money home? To love one's own family was a noble character. Didn't you all remit money home too? Number 3. Did the Chinese seize the Americans' jobs? The Chinese came to the U.S. when labor was urgently needed for railway construction. Number 4. Were the Chinese frugal? Lincoln once said that frugality was a virtue in New England. Number 5. Were the Chinese unclean, messy, and always together? That was because prejudice got in the way of improving living conditions. With similar habits, language, and facing persecution, of course they would stick together. Number 6. Did prostitutes live in Chinatown? If you compare that with 20,000 male Caucasians who hung out together, Chinatown would be a model town by all means. George Frisbie Hoar. Hoar was born in Concord, Massachusetts in 1826 and graduated from Harvard Law School in 1846. Shortly after the Republican Party began, he joined and represented Massachusetts as a congressman for 4 terms. Then, he was a senator until he passed away in 1904 during his 5th term. When Congress discussed extending the Chinese Exclusion Act indefinitely in 1902, John H. Mitchell, an Oregon senator and a strong proponent of Chinese exclusion, initiated the motions to not only intensify anti-Chinese actions, but also extend the application of the act from the U.S. mainland to all the districts controlled by the U.S. This included the Philippines and Hawaii, even to oust the Chinese born there. Senator Hoar was vehemently against the motions, even though he knew he could not change the final outcome. He stated that every human soul has its rights, dependent upon individual personal worth and not dependent upon color or race. He opposed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, describing it as nothing less than the legalization of racial discrimination, and said, "Even if I had to fight alone, my vote must be recorded." The motion to extend the Chinese Exclusion Act was eventually passed with 76 yeas and 1 nay. Hoar was the only senator who cast a nay vote. Larry Deleeuw. Protect Chinese Cemeteries. Lovelock, Nevada was once a prominent station in Chinese settlement along the railway. In Lone Mountain outside the town, there is a cemetery of Chinese people. None of the tombs had any marks, names, or dates. Only the nearby railway and timber sleepers bear witness to their stories. After moving to Lovelock from California, Larry Deleeuw got to know Frank Chang, the only Chinese descendant in town. Deleeuw became interested in Chinese history after he and Chang became friends. Deleeuw built a metal fence around the cemetery and a brick fireplace for joss paper burning, one of Chinese sacrificial customs. For years, Deleeuw strived to maintain the cemetery. He said to Li Ju, a Chinese photographer, "The day you come here, the day is Qingming Festival." Reno the Youth. In August 2018, 6 white youths from Reno, Nevada, inspired by the contributions of the Chinese workers, held a small memorial concert at Donner Pass Summit Tunnel. Director Zhou Ming happened to capture the scene when filming the documentary Black Road Spikes.